The gunshot echoed across the barren landscape, shattering the night's silence. Savannah Running Water ran through the darkness, her breath coming in ragged gasps, the wound in her side burning with each step. Behind her, voices called out angry, determined hunting. She clutched a weathered leather pouch and a small wooden box close to her chest, more precious than her own life. Blood dripped from her side, marking the path she took across the rocky terrain. Flashes of memory pierced her mind. Like lightning, her husband Thomas beaten to death with a shovel. Before her eyes, his final gaze locked on hers as life left him. The cabin ransacked furniture, destroyed 3 men demanding gold she didn't know existed. The moon emerged from behind a cloud, bathing the desert in silver light. Savannah stumbled, her vision blurring. In the distance, a lone structure stood against the night sky, a ranch house with a flickering light in the window. Her ancestors' voices whispered in the wind, urging her forward. "Run to the setting sun, daughter," they seemed to say. With the last of her strength, Savannah pushed toward the ranch. The pain in her side grew unbearable, darkness creeping at the edges of her vision. As she reached the gate, her legs gave way. The wooden box and leather pouch fell beside her as she collapsed in the dirt. Through fading consciousness, she saw boots approaching, worn leather covered in dust. Then darkness took her completely. Ezra Morgan worked iron in the night when sleep wouldn't come. The rhythmic hammering drove away the demons, the nightmares, the faces of the dead. At 45, his body bore the scars of battles, both physical and spiritual, a testament to a life that had taken more than it had given. The forge's glow cast long shadows across his weathered face, highlighting the lines around his eyes that spoke of loss rather than laughter. He worked the metal with practiced precision, transforming raw iron into something useful, something with purpose, unlike the shapeless void of his existence. 15 years had passed since he'd worn the uniform of a border scout, since he'd earned the name White Ghost among the Apache. 15 years since the night he'd lost everything he'd once held dear. Now he lived alone on this patch of Arizona territory, miles from the nearest town, reclusive and wary. The sound came as he was cooling the iron, a crash by the front gate. Ezra grabbed his rifle from the wall, moving with the silent grace of a man who had learned to hunt both beast and man. Through the window, he spotted a figure collapsed in the dirt. His first instinct was caution. Ambushes weren't uncommon in these parts. He circled wide, rifle ready, approaching from behind. The figure didn't move. Drawing closer, he saw it was a woman, face down, blood soaking her side. An Apache woman. Ezra hesitated, old hatreds and memories rising like bile in his throat. The Apache had taken his family, wife, daughter, future. And here was one of them, bleeding at his gate. The just thing would be to leave her for the coyotes or put a bullet in her head to end her suffering. That's what most settlers would do. His finger tensed on the trigger, then relaxed. Whatever she'd done, whatever her people had done, he couldn't execute a defenseless woman. That wasn't the man he'd become, or at least not the man he was trying to be. Kneeling beside her, Ezra turned her over gently. Her face was striking, even in pain. High cheekbones, strong features, tribal markings partially visible beneath the dirt and blood. She couldn't be more than 25. In the moonlight, he noticed something that made his blood run cold, a tattoo on her arm, the mark of a specific Apache clan. His clan. The one that had raided the outpost where his family had been waiting for him. The one that had killed his wife and daughter 8 years ago. Fate had a cruel sense of humor. As Ezra debated what to do, the woman's eyes fluttered open briefly. Through cracked lips, she whispered in Apache, then in broken English, "They killed him. They're coming." Her words hung in the night air like the last notes of a funeral dirge. Then she lost consciousness again. In the distance, Ezra heard the faint sound of hoofbeats. Whoever they were indeed coming. Decision time. "Not your night to die, Apache girl," he muttered, lifting her gently. He carried her to the cabin, her weight surprisingly light in his arms. The wooden box and leather pouch he tucked under his arm. Whatever they were, they seemed important enough for her to hold on to while fleeing for her life. Inside, he laid her on the bench near the hearth, the fire's glow revealing the extent of her injuries. A bullet had grazed her side, tearing through flesh, but missing vital organs. She had other bruises and cuts, evidence of a beating. Her breathing came shallow but steady. Ezra moved with efficiency, gathering clean cloths, water, and whiskey. He'd patched enough wounds in his time to know what to do. As he cut away the fabric around her wound, she stirred her face, contorting in pain. "Easy," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. "It hurts. I know. It'll be over quick." Her eyes flashed open, wild with fear and pain. "Light," she gasped. "Please. I hurt." "I know," he replied, continuing his work. "I'll be quick." The wound wasn't deep, but it had bled enough to leave a trail, enough for men to follow. After cleaning and bandaging it, Ezra checked her other injuries. Nothing life-threatening, though. She'd been through hell by the looks of it. He glanced at the items she'd been carrying. The wooden box was old, locked with a simple mechanism. The leather pouch was clearly Apache-made, adorned with beadwork and symbols he recognized from his time as a scout. She'd held these things like they contained her very soul. Outside, the wind picked up, and in the distance, far too close for comfort, came the sound of hooves. They were coming. Whoever had done this to her, whoever had killed the him she mentioned, they were tracking her. Ezra moved to the window, peering into the darkness. 3 riders moving steadily toward the ranch. Hunting. He had a choice to make, and not much time to make it. Savannah drifted in and out of consciousness, caught between worlds. In her delirium, she saw Thomas smiling at her across their small table, heard his laughter as he told her about the land in Oregon they would someday buy. Then the images shifted. Thomas on the floor, blood pooling around him, his eyes empty. Men tearing their home apart, demanding gold, the shovel rising and falling. She jerked awake, a strangled cry escaping her lips. The unfamiliar surroundings disoriented her further. A cabin not her own, lit by firelight and a single lantern. Her side throbbed with pain, but someone had bandaged it. A man sat in a chair across from her, watching silently. Tall, lean, weathered his face, half in shadow, half illuminated by the fire's glow. His eyes, pale and penetrating, studied her with an unreadable expression. "Where am I?" She managed her voice barely above a whisper. "My ranch," he answered simply. "Found you at my gate, half dead." Savannah tried to sit up, wincing at the pain. The man made no move to help her, but he didn't stop her either. When she was upright, she noticed the box and pouch on the table. Relief washed over her. She hadn't lost them. "Thank you," she said, meeting his gaze directly, "for helping me." "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "There were men following your trail, 3 of them. They'll be here soon." Fear clutched at her heart. "They killed my husband," she said, the words catching in her throat. "Beat him with a shovel. I heard it." She closed her eyes, trying to block out the sound of bone cracking, wood splitting. "They kept tearing through the house. Said he lied about gold." The man didn't speak, just listened, his face impassive. "The thing is," she continued, her voice steadying, "he didn't have any gold. We barely had enough to eat." "People brag," the man said finally. Say things to the wrong person at the wrong time. Savannah nodded. He liked to talk big. Said we'd strike it rich someday. Said he'd buy me land in Oregon. But he was just talking. We didn't even own the house. She looked over at the wooden box. I grabbed that on instinct. It was under the table. Maybe Wade put something in it, maybe not. But they'll come back for it. The man stood, poured a small measure of whiskey into a tin cup and handed it to her. She sipped, coughing as the liquor burned her throat. Then panic flashed across her face. They saw me run. They'll track me here. They'll try, the man said, unmoved. You don't understand, she insisted. One of them big man with a broken nose, he worked for us last spring. Fixed our roof. He knows, this land knows where the nearest ranches are. The man nodded slowly. Then I reckon he knows me too. Savannah studied him, really seeing him for the first time. The way he held himself, the scars on his hands, the rifle resting against the wall within easy reach. This wasn't just a rancher. This was a fighter, a survivor. You're not planning to fight them, are you? He looked out the window. The wind was picking up storm clouds gathering in the west. You got a better idea. She went quiet, considering their options. The man walked to the back room, moved a wooden barrel aside, revealing a trap door covered in dust. He looked over his shoulder. Ever hear of a hider's hole? Savannah shook her head. Back in the war, we used to dig them behind barns in case the Rebs came through. Big enough for two, quiet enough to wait them out. She sat up straighter. You think they'll check the barn? I hope they do. He lifted the trap door. Now you can sit here and worry, or you can help me set a trap they'll never forget. Their eyes locked, an understanding passing between them. Then the wind howled through the cracks in the cabin walls, and far off in the dark, a single shot echoed. Just one, but it meant everything. This man, this stranger who had saved her, knew they weren't coming to talk. They were coming to finish what they started. The shot echoed through the valley like thunder rolling over dry land. Ezra froze for half a breath, hands still on the trap door. Then another sound followed, hooves slow at first, then faster, closer. Savannah's fingers clutched the blanket around her shoulders. They found the trail, she whispered. Ezra nodded once, calm as a man hearing rain after years of drought. He grabbed his rifle from the rack, checked the chamber, and gave her a look that didn't need words. You hide down there, he said. No talking, no light. I can help, she offered, struggling to stand. He shook his head. Not tonight. She wanted to argue, but something in his eyes stopped her. It wasn't fear. It was memory, the kind that only soldiers carried. She recognized it. Her father had worn the same look when telling stories of battles long past. Climbing down into the dark space beneath the floor, Savannah settled on the dirt floor. Ezra lowered the lid and covered it with a rug. Then he blew out the lamps, leaving only the forge outside, casting a dull red glow that painted the room in blood and shadow. Outside, the horses stopped. 3 voices laughing, confident. One called out, "Evening, old man. We're looking for a lady came through here. Pretty thing wounded, carrying something that belongs to us." Ezra didn't answer immediately. He moved quietly to the side window, studying their shapes in the darkness. 2 remained on horseback. One had dismounted a shotgun, resting casually on his shoulder. They looked tired, but mean faces lit by torchlight men who'd done enough killing to stop caring. Ezra took a deep breath, whispering to himself, "All right, boys, let's dance." He stepped out into the open. The wind caught his hat brim, his shadow stretching across the dirt like a ghost. "She ain't here," he said. The man with the shotgun grinned. Funny thing, though, her blood trail says otherwise. Ezra smiled back, cold and hard. Then you better be sure it's hers before you follow it. The big one with the broken nose spat in the dirt. You hiding her, Morgan? Ezra's eyes narrowed slightly at the use of his name. I'm hiding no one, but I don't take kindly to men threatening women on my land. The man chuckled. Ain't your land anymore. He lifted the shotgun slightly. Ezra moved first. The shot came from the shadows near the forge, Ezra rolling to one side as he fired. The second followed fast, the man with the shotgun dropping to one knee. Sparks flew from the iron frame as a bullet hit the anvil. Horses screamed, men shouted, more shots exchanged in rapid succession. From the darkness under the floor, Savannah covered her ears. Her heart pounded so loud it drowned out everything else. In the silence that followed, she heard a scream, quick, final, deadly. The forge hissed as blood hit the coals. When Ezra opened the trap door, smoke rolled in behind him. His voice was calm, but his hands were shaking slightly. It's done, he said. Savannah stared at him. Are they, all of them? Not all, he replied. One's still breathing, and he's going to tell me why your husband had to die. The man was barely alive, blood soaking through his shirt, where Ezra's bullet had found its mark. He lay propped against the fence, his breath coming in wet rattles. The smell of iron and smoke hung heavy in the air. Ezra crouched beside him, the fire from the forge flickering across both their faces. Why, Wade? Ezra asked, his voice deceptively soft. The man coughed, spitting red, trying to smile through broken teeth. He owed us. No, Ezra said firmly. You owed him. He paid you for fixing that roof. The man's eyes darted toward the barn, a gesture not lost on Ezra. Something there, something the man was afraid of or wanted. Ezra leaned closer. What's in the barn? When the man didn't answer, Ezra grabbed a rag and pressed it hard against his wound. The man screamed. Gold, he gasped. Said he had gold. Ezra frowned. Who told you that? The man blinked slowly, his head drooping. Someone in town, he whispered. Old man, said Wade, hit a vein near the creek. We came to collect. Ezra stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. Collect, he said quietly. You call that collecting? He looked down at the dying man. You just buried yourself in that same dirt, boy. Behind him, the barn door creaked. Savannah stepped out from the shadows holding a lantern. She looked pale, tired, but remarkably composed for a woman who had endured so much in one night. You shouldn't have come out, Ezra said, not unkindly. I had to see, she replied softly. I had to know. Her eyes went to the man's body, then to Ezra. You think he was telling the truth? Ezra nodded toward the barn. Only one way to find out. They pushed open the big doors together, the lantern light spilling across the dirt floor. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary old tool's hay and the smell of rust and animals. Savannah set the lantern down, disappointment evident on her face. There's nothing here. Ezra kicked at the ground, his boot making a hollow sound. He dropped to his knees, brushing away the dirt, to reveal a trap door similar to the one in the cabin. They stared at each other. Ezra lifted it open. Inside, stacked neatly in a wooden chest, were gold coins. Real ones, dozens of them, glinting in the lantern light. Savannah gasped, her hand going to her mouth. He was going to surprise me, she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. He said we'd buy land out west. Her hands trembled as she touched the coins. He wasn't lying after all. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the crackle of the forge outside filled the silence. Then Savannah said quietly, He died for this. Ezra looked at her, his eyes reflecting the gold's gleam. And we just might live because of it. Outside, the wind shifted. A distant sound echoed off the ridge hoofbeats again. Slow, heavy, too steady to be wild horses. Ezra's hand went to his gun. He looked at Savannah, then at the gold. They weren't the only ones looking for that treasure. So the question remained when the next rider came through that gate. Would they be friend or something far worse? The sound of hooves grew closer, deliberate and unhurried. Ezra stepped forward, rifle still in hand, his shadow stretching long across the dirt floor of the barn. Savannah stood behind him, holding the lantern tight. The flame trembled, as did her breath. Out of the darkness came a single rider. Old coat, dusty hat, no gun drawn. He stopped at the gate and lifted a hand in greeting. Ezra aimed anyway. "Who are you?" he called, voice carrying on the night wind. The man dismounted slowly, movements careful and deliberate. "Name's McCready, sheriff from Silver Creek." Ezra hesitated, then lowered his rifle slightly, but didn't set it aside. The sheriff walked up to the fence, his gaze taking in the scene, the bodies on the ground, the open barn door, the gold glinting faintly in the lantern light from within. "Looks like you had yourselves a long night," he observed dryly. Ezra nodded once. "Long enough?" Sheriff McCready scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Heard gunfire. Came to see if anyone was still alive." Ezra studied the man carefully. There was something in his eyes, something calculating that didn't match his casual demeanor. The sheriff returned his gaze steadily, then looked past him to Savannah. "Ma'am?" He tipped his hat. "You Thomas Sullivan's wife." Savannah stepped forward, still clutching the lantern. "Yes?" She answered, her voice stronger than Ezra expected. McCready nodded. "Heard what happened at your place. Sorry about your husband." "How did you know where to find me?" Savannah asked, suspicion edging her voice. "Tracked the same men you did," McCready replied, gesturing to the bodies. "Been after them for a while. They've done this before, hear rumors of gold, kill for it." He looked pointedly at the chest in the barn. "You two best get that buried. Folks kill for less out here." Ezra's grip on his rifle remained firm. "You rode out awful fast for a sheriff who just heard gunshots." McCready's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say I had reason to be in the area." The tension hung in the air between them, unspoken questions and suspicions, as thick as the coming storm clouds. Finally, McCready turned back to his horse. "I'll send someone for the bodies tomorrow. Far as I'm concerned, this was self-defense." He mounted up, then added, "That gold's gonna bring more trouble. You'd be wise to move on, both of you." With that, he rode off into the darkness, the sound of hoofbeats gradually fading until only the wind remained. Ezra and Savannah returned to the cabin in silence, both lost in thought. Inside, Ezra rekindled the fire, while Savannah sat at the table staring at the wooden box she'd brought from her home. "Something's not right with him," Ezra said finally. Savannah nodded. "How did he know about the gold Thomas never told anyone?" She looked up at Ezra. "And why didn't he ask more questions? 3 dead men, and he just rides off." Ezra set down his rifle and pulled up a chair. "You should try to get some rest. Morning's not far off, and we've got decisions to make." "About the gold." "About everything." Savannah's fingers traced the carvings on the wooden box. "I still don't understand why I grabbed this. Something told me it was important." Ezra studied the box more carefully now. It was beautifully made with intricate Apache designs carved into the dark wood. "May I?" he asked, extending his hand. She hesitated, then passed it to him. He turned it over in his hands, examining the craftsmanship. "This is Apache work," he said. "High quality, not something you'd find in a settler's home." "Thomas traded for it in town last winter," Savannah explained. "Said it reminded him of me. My mother was Apache." Ezra's eyes flicked to her face, reassessing. Her features now made more sense, the high cheekbones, the particular shade of her skin. He'd assumed she was full-blooded, but now he saw the mixed heritage in her appearance. "That explains the tattoo," he said quietly. Savannah's hand unconsciously moved to her arm where the tribal markings were partially visible beneath her torn sleeve. "You recognized it." "I was a scout for the army," Ezra replied, his voice flat. 15 years tracking Apache. "The white ghost," she whispered, eyes widening with sudden recognition. Ezra's jaw tightened. "That's what they called me. My people believed you killed 20 warriors in a single night. And your people killed my wife and daughter." Ezra replied, the words hanging between them like a physical barrier. "So I reckon we're even." Savannah didn't flinch from his gaze. "Is that why you helped me? To balance some cosmic scale?" "I helped you because you needed help," he said simply. "The past is dead ground. Nothing grows there." The fire crackled in the hearth, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Outside, the wind had died down, and the first hints of dawn were lightening the eastern sky. "Get some sleep if you can," Ezra said, rising from his chair. "I'll keep watch." As Savannah settled back on the bench, pulling the blanket around her shoulders, she asked, "What about the gold?" Ezra looked toward the barn, his expression unreadable. "Gold makes men crazy, always has. We'll figure it out, come morning." He moved to the window, watching as the darkness slowly gave way to grey light. Behind him, Savannah's breathing eventually deepened into sleep. Ezra remained vigilant, his thoughts turning over the events of the night. The Apache woman with the settler husband. The gold hidden beneath the barn. The sheriff who asked too few questions. And the wooden box with tribal carvings that seemed more important to Savannah than the gold itself. Nothing was as simple as it first appeared, and Ezra had a feeling that their troubles were just beginning. The morning came soft and gray, the storm having passed without breaking. Ezra had dozed in the chair by the window rifle across his lap, waking at the slightest sound. Savannah still slept, exhaustion and trauma keeping her under, despite the growing light. Ezra moved quietly, stoking the fire and setting coffee to brew. His body ached from the night's exertions, but his mind was clear. They needed a plan, and they needed it before anyone else came looking for gold or revenge. He stepped outside, surveying the damage from the night before. The bodies lay where they had fallen, already drawing flies. He'd have to bury them soon. The horses the men had ridden were gone, spooked by the gunfire or taken by the sheriff, he couldn't be sure. In the barn, the chest of gold remained open, coins glinting dully in the morning light. Ezra knelt beside it, counting quickly. Not a fortune, but enough to start a new life somewhere. No wonder Wade Sullivan had kept it secret. The sound of footsteps made him turn. Savannah stood in the doorway, her figure silhouetted against the morning sky. She'd found a shawl to wrap around her shoulders, and though she looked pale and tired, there was a strength in her posture that commanded respect. "We need to bury him," she said simply. Ezra nodded. "We will." Together, they buried Wade Sullivan on the hill behind the ranch. The sun broke through just enough to warm the stone Ezra placed at the head of the grave. Savannah stood there for a long while, her face a mask of grief and resolve. "Thank you," she said, finally turning to Ezra. You saved my life. A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. Maybe. But you kept me human. Back at the cabin, they shared a simple breakfast of coffee and biscuits. The wooden box and leather pouch sat on the table between them along with more practical concerns. "What will you do now?" Ezra asked. Savannah looked out the window toward the horizon. "I don't know. I can't go back to our place. Even if they didn't burn it down, there's too many memories. The gold." "I don't think I want gold anymore, Ezra," she interrupted. "I just want peace." He nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "Peace is harder to find than gold. But if you're lucky, it shows up when you least expect it." A comfortable silence settled between them. For two people who had been strangers the night before, they'd forged a connection through shared danger and loss that bypassed normal social conventions. "Tell me about your wife," Savannah said suddenly. Ezra stiffened, old pain flaring in his eyes. "Why would you ask about that?" "Because you keep looking at that chair by the fire like someone should be sitting in it," she replied gently. "And because I've seen how you touch that locket around your neck when you think I'm not looking." His hand moved unconsciously to the small silver locket that hung on a worn leather cord. "Her name was Rebecca," he said after a long pause. "She had eyes that could see right through you, and a laugh that made you forget every bad thing you'd ever done. And your daughter, Sarah." His voice softened on the name. "She was just a little thing, 6 years old, hair like sunshine." Savannah waited, giving him space to continue or stop as he needed. "They were staying at the outpost while I was on a scouting mission." He continued, the words coming slowly. "Apache raiders hid it while I was gone. By the time I got back—" He shook his head, unable to finish. "I'm sorry," Savannah said simply. Ezra looked at her directly. "It was your clan. The marks on your arm, they're from the White Mountain Band." Savannah nodded, holding his gaze. "Yes, but I was a child then, living with my mother's people after my father died. I wasn't part of any raid." "I know," Ezra admitted. "Doesn't make it easier to see those marks, though. Is that why you left the army after the raid?" "No." His face darkened. "I left because of what came after. The retaliation. Whole villages, women, children." He stopped, unwilling to speak the horrors aloud. "I couldn't be part of that." Savannah understood. The massacres of her mother's people were well known, spoken of in hushed tones around campfires. The army's revenge had been swift and merciless. "And now?" she asked. After all these years, Ezra looked out the window to the hills where the morning sun was finally breaking through the clouds. "Now I just try to live with myself. Some days are easier than others." The weeks that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Savannah's wound healed slowly, and as she regained strength, she began helping around the ranch. Ezra found himself growing accustomed to her presence, the sound of another voice, the sharing of meals and tasks. The gold remained hidden, reburied beneath the barn floor. Neither spoke much about it, as if by mutual agreement they had decided to deal with more immediate concerns first. Savannah revealed skills Ezra hadn't expected: knowledge of plants for medicine, an eye for tracking game, and a quiet wisdom that belied her youth. In turn, he taught her about ranching, about maintaining the forge, about surviving in this harsh land. Sometimes in the evenings they would sit by the fire talking or simply existing in comfortable silence. The wooden box remained unopened, though Savannah would often hold it, running her fingers over the carvings as if drawing comfort from them. In town, rumors spread about the Apache woman staying at Morgan's ranch, but Ezra ignored them. He'd never cared much for public opinion, and he wasn't about to start now. Sheriff McCready came by once, ostensibly to check on them. His eyes lingered too long on the barn, his questions about the gold too pointed to be casual. Ezra answered minimally, and Savannah stayed inside. After he left, they agreed there was something unsettling about the man's interest. One evening, as summer gave way to early autumn, Savannah finally opened the wooden box. Inside was a folded piece of deerskin covered in symbols and markings Ezra recognized as an Apache map. "It was my father's," she explained carefully, unfolding it. "He left it for me before he disappeared." "Disappeared?" Ezra asked. "He was a scout for the army like you," Savannah said. "When I was a child, he went on a mission and never returned. My mother always believed he was still alive somewhere." Ezra studied the map, recognition dawning in his eyes. "This is a map to Spirit Valley. It's sacred land to the Apache." Savannah nodded. "The Valley of Souls, we call it, where ancestors rest." "I thought it was just a legend," Ezra murmured, tracing the landmarks with his finger. "It's real," Savannah assured him. "And there's more." She carefully removed a false bottom from the box, revealing a letter written in Apache. As she read it, her face grew pale. "My father. He was a guide for an army unit that attacked an Apache village. He didn't know their intentions until it was too late." She looked up at Ezra, her eyes wide. "It was your outpost, Ezra. He was trying to warn the Apache about the attack, when your family—" The implications hung in the air between them. Her father had been involved in the very raid that had taken Ezra's family, trying to prevent it but failing. "There's more," she continued, voice shaking slightly. "He says he tried to save a woman and child during the chaos, but lost them in the fighting." Ezra's hand went to the locket around his neck, his face ashen. "Rebecca and Sarah," he whispered. "He hid them in a cave, hoping to return, but the army caught up with him. They accused him of betrayal." Savannah looked up from the letter. "He escaped, but couldn't go back for them. He never knew if they survived." "They didn't," Ezra said flatly. "I found them at the outpost. They never made it to any cave." Savannah stared at him. "Are you certain it was them?" The question struck Ezra like a physical blow. He'd identified the bodies himself, but they had been burned beyond recognition in the fire that consumed the outpost. He'd identified them by Rebecca's wedding ring and a piece of Sarah's dress. For the first time, doubt crept into his voice. "I thought I was. My father's letter says he gave the woman his own wedding band for safe passage if they encountered Apache warriors," Savannah said quietly. "A silver ring with turquoise inlay." Ezra's world tilted on its axis. The ring he'd found on the burned body, it had been silver with turquoise. He'd assumed it was Rebecca's, damaged in the fire. But what if— "It can't be," he said, more to himself than to Savannah. "I buried them. I mourned them. They're gone." Savannah placed her hand gently on his arm. "Maybe. But what if they're not?" Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the promise of rain. Inside the cabin, two souls bound by tragedy and circumstance faced a possibility too painful to embrace, yet too important to ignore. What if everything Ezra had believed for 8 long years had been wrong? Ezra couldn't sleep. The night stretched endlessly as he sat on the porch, staring at the silver ring in his palm, the very one he'd recovered from the burned body at the outpost. The turquoise inlay caught the moonlight, sending blue reflections dancing across his weathered face. Could he have been wrong all these years? The bodies had been charred beyond recognition. He'd identified his wife and daughter by the ring and a scrap of cloth. What if they hadn't been Rebecca and Sarah Hope? Was dangerous, more dangerous than despair. Ezra had learned to live with loss, had built walls around his heart that kept the pain manageable. To tear those walls down now, only to discover his family was truly gone. The door creaked open behind him. Savannah stepped out wrapped in a blanket against the night chill. "You should be resting," Ezra said without looking up. "So should you." She settled beside him on the step. "But I don't think either of us will sleep tonight." Silence stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken thoughts. "Even if they survived the attack," Ezra said finally, "it's been 8 years. They would have found a way to let me know they were alive." "Unless they couldn't," Savannah replied. "Or unless they thought you were dead too." Ezra closed his fist around the ring. "It's a fool's hope. Sometimes a fool's hope is all we have," she said softly. "My father's letter mentions a cave near Eagle Rock. It's marked on the map. If they made it there, and if they didn't," the pain in Ezra's voice was raw, exposed. "I buried them once. I don't know if I can do it again." Savannah placed her hand gently over his closed fist. "You don't have to decide tonight. But Ezra, wouldn't you want to know the truth? Whatever it is." He turned to look at her, moonlight silvering her features. In the short time she'd been at the ranch, Savannah had shown a strength and wisdom that belied her years. She'd lost her husband, her home, yet still found the courage to face an uncertain future. "Yes," he admitted, "I would." They sat in silence as the moon tracked across the sky, two souls connected by tragedy, yet somehow finding solace in shared pain. "Tell me about Thomas," Ezra said after a while. A smile touched Savannah's lips, sad but genuine. "He was kind. Not in the easy way of some men, but in the way that matters, standing up for what's right even when it costs him." She looked out at the darkened landscape. "He saw me when others looked through me. The half-Apache girl no one wanted to claim." "How did you meet?" "He was passing through the reservation trading supplies. I was working at the agency store." Her voice softened with memory. "He kept coming back week after week, always needing something he'd forgotten to buy the time before. Finally, the store owner told him to either propose or stop wasting merchandise space." Ezra chuckled, the sound rusty from disuse. "We had 3 good years," Savannah continued. "Not easy ones. People didn't take kindly to a white man with an Apache wife, but good. Thomas had dreams bigger than our little cabin, though." "The gold," she nodded. "He never told me about finding it. I think he wanted it to be a surprise, a way to give me the life he thought I deserved." Her voice caught. "I would have been happy with just him and the cabin." Ezra understood. Dreams could be deadly things, drawing people away from the simple joys they already possessed. "Dawn's coming," he observed, noting the faint lightening on the eastern horizon. "We should try to get some rest. Tomorrow we can study that map more carefully." As they rose to go inside, the sound of approaching horses broke the pre-dawn silence. Not just one or two, but several moving fast and with purpose. Ezra was instantly alert, hand going to the pistol at his hip. "Get inside," he ordered quietly. "It's McCready," Savannah whispered, peering into the gloom. "I recognize his horse, but he's not alone." Indeed, the sheriff was leading 4 men, all armed, all riding with the confidence of those who believed the law was on their side, or at least would look the other way. "Get your things," Ezra said, his voice low and urgent. "And the map. Go out the back and head for the barn. There's a loose board on the north side, squeeze through, and hide in the root cellar beneath the floor. What about you? I'll handle McCready." His face hardened. "One way or another." Savannah hesitated, then hurried inside. Ezra remained on the porch, deliberately casual as the riders approached. McCready reined in his horse at the gate, the other men fanning out behind him in a practiced formation. "Morning, Morgan," the sheriff called, his voice falsely cheerful. "Bit early for social calls, I know, But we've got business. Must be important to bring such a crowd, Ezra replied evenly. McCready dismounted his boots, raising puffs of dust as he approached. Got reports of stolen property, gold specifically, and rumors say it's on your land. Heard those rumors, have you? Ezra didn't move from his position on the porch. Funny how fast news travels. Small town. McCready's smile didn't reach his eyes. We're here to conduct a search. Official business. You got a warrant. Don't need one. I've got probable cause and 4 deputies who'll back my word against yours. The sheriff's hand rested casually on his holster. Now where's the Indian woman? Ezra's expression remained neutral, though his muscles tensed. Gone. Headed west a couple days ago. Took nothing but her clothes and some provisions. McCready's eyes narrowed. You expect me to believe that after you killed 3 men protecting her, believe what you want. She's not here. The sheriff studied Ezra for a long moment, then turned to his men. Search the place. Every corner, every hiding spot. As the men dismounted, Ezra stepped down from the porch, blocking their path. You set 1 foot in my house without a warrant, McCready, and we're going to have a problem. The tension in the air was palpable, both men measuring each other, calculating odds and outcomes. You really want to die for some Apache whore and a box of gold? McCready asked quietly. Watch your mouth, Ezra warned, his voice deadly calm. And ask yourself if you're ready to lose men over this. McCready's hand twitched toward his gun, but he caught himself. Instead, he smiled thinly. Have it your way, Morgan, for now. He turned to his men. Search the outbuildings. Leave the house for later. As the men spread out toward the barn and storage sheds, Ezra maintained his position, mentally tracking Savannah's probable location and praying she'd had enough time to hide. McCready remained by the gate, watching Ezra with calculating eyes. You know, he said conversationally, I've been looking for that gold for a long time, ever since I heard rumors of an Apache guide who found a vein near Eagle Rock. Ezra kept his expression neutral, though his pulse quickened at the mention of Eagle Rock, the very landmark on Savannah's map. Seems this guide was working for the army, McCready continued. Got himself in trouble when a raid went wrong, disappeared with a map to the gold. He studied Ezra's face for reaction. Interesting coincidence, don't you think, you taking in his daughter? I don't know what you're talking about. No! McCready's smile turned predatory. I think you do. I think that Apache woman is Running Water's daughter, and I think she brought her daddy's map right to your doorstep. The name hit Ezra like a physical blow. Running Water had been the Apache scout assigned to his unit, the very man who had led them to the outpost, who had disappeared after the attack. Sheriff, one of the deputies called from the barn. Found something. McCready's eyes gleamed with triumph. Seems we'll be taking that search warrant after all, Morgan. Inside the barn, the men had discovered the loose floorboards covering the gold. They gathered around the open chest, eyes wide with greed, barely disguised as lawful duty. Stolen property just as reported, McCready declared loudly. We'll be confiscating this as evidence. Evidence of what? Ezra demanded. That chest belonged to Thomas Sullivan. It's his widow's property now. Sullivan stole it, McCready replied smoothly. From a mining operation near Eagle Rock. The owner's been looking for it for months. And who might that owner be? Ezra asked, though he already suspected the answer. McCready's smile widened. Why, that would be me. One of the deputies closed the chest, and 2 men lifted it between them. As they carried it toward the horses, McCready turned back to Ezra. Now about that map and the woman. I told you. She's gone. McCready studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. Have it your way, but this isn't over Morgan, not by a long shot. He mounted his horse, looking down at Ezra with contempt. I'll be back with a proper warrant. Might be easier on everyone if you just cleared out. This is my land. Ezra stated, his voice hard as iron. For now. With that parting threat, McCready led his men away, the chest of gold secure among them. Ezra waited until they were out of sight before moving. He circled the barn cautiously, checking for any deputies who might have stayed behind as lookouts. Finding none, he slipped through the loose board on the north side. "Savannah," he called softly. The root cellar door creaked open and she emerged, clutching the wooden box and leather pouch. Relief flooded her face at the sight of him. "I heard everything," she whispered. "They took the gold." "Let them have it," Ezra replied. "It's you they really want. You and the map." Savannah's expression hardened. "He knew my father." "Yes." Ezra helped her climb out of the cellar. "And now we know why he's been watching us. He's been looking for the map for years. What do we do?" Ezra looked out at the horizon, his mind racing. "We need to leave. McCready will be back, and next time he won't be so easily turned away." "Leave," Savannah's voice caught. "But your ranch is just land and wood," Ezra finished. "It's not worth dying for." The decision formed in his mind with surprising clarity. "We'll head for Eagle Rock. If there's any chance. If Rebecca and Sarah might have survived." He couldn't finish the thought, the hope too fragile to voice aloud. Understanding dawned in Savannah's eyes. "And we might find answers about my father, too." Ezra nodded. "Pack only what we can carry on horseback. Food, water, ammunition. We leave within the hour." As Savannah hurried to gather supplies, Ezra took a last look around the ranch that had been his home for 8 years. The cabin he'd built with his own hands. The forge where he'd worked iron on sleepless nights. The hills where he'd imagined Rebecca and Sarah were watching over him. He'd thought this place would be his final resting ground. Now it was just another stopping point in a journey that had begun long ago with an Apache raid and a silver ring with turquoise inlay. They rode hard through the day, taking paths only a former scout would know, avoiding the main trails where McCready might have posted men. Ezra led on his chestnut gelding, with Savannah following on a dappled mare. They spoke little, both lost in thoughts of what lay ahead. The landscape changed gradually as they traveled the flat desert, giving way to rolling hills, and eventually the rugged foothills that led to Eagle Rock. By late afternoon, they had reached a sheltered canyon where a small stream provided water. "We'll camp here," Ezra decided, dismounting stiffly. "Continue at first light." Savannah slid from her horse with practiced grace, though Ezra could see the exhaustion in her movements. The day's hard riding had taken its toll on her still healing body. They made camp efficiently with the unspoken coordination of people who had worked together before. Savannah gathered wood, while Ezra set snares for rabbits. Neither wanted to risk a fire large enough to be spotted from a distance. As night fell, they sat close to the small flame, sharing jerky and hardtack. The stars emerged overhead, brilliant in the clear desert sky. "According to the map," Savannah said, unfolding the deerskin carefully, "Eagle Rock is half a day's ride from here. The cave should be on the eastern face, hidden behind a stand of juniper trees." Ezra studied the map, committing the landmarks to memory. "Your father was thorough." "He was a scout," she replied simply. "Like you." The comparison hung in the air between them. Running Water and Ezra Morgan, men from different worlds who had followed similar paths. "Did McCready tell the truth?" Savannah asked suddenly. "About the gold being stolen from a mine near Eagle Rock?" Ezra considered the question. "Possibly. Eagle Rock was known Apache territory until about 10 years ago. If your father found gold there, he might have shown Thomas the location. And McCready. McCready was an officer when I knew him. Captain, I think. Always had an eye for opportunities others missed. Ezra's expression darkened. And a convenient blindness to the suffering of others. You think he was involved in the raid? The one where my father disappeared? I don't know, but I intend to find out. Silence fell between them, broken only by the soft crackling of the fire. Ezra stared into the flames, his thoughts turning to Rebecca and Sarah. If they had survived, where had they been all these years? Why hadn't they tried to find him? You're wondering if it's better not knowing, Savannah observed quietly. Ezra looked up, startled by her insight. I used to wonder the same about my father, she continued. Was he dead? Had he abandoned us? Which would hurt less? And what did you decide? That truth, however painful, is better than doubt. She met his gaze across the fire. Doubt corrodes the soul, Ezra. Truth, at least, can be faced. He nodded slowly, acknowledging the wisdom in her words. Get some rest, he said finally. I'll take first watch. As Savannah settled into her bedroll, Ezra moved to a rocky outcropping that provided a view of the canyon's entrance. The night was quiet, the desert alive with its own subtle symphony of sounds, the rustle of nocturnal creatures, the soft sigh of wind through cacti. His hand went to the locket around his neck. Inside was a small portrait of Rebecca, painted in happier times, and a lock of Sarah's golden hair. He'd carried them close to his heart for 8 years, a constant reminder of all he had lost. What if they were alive? The question haunted him, filled with equal parts hope and terror. He'd rebuilt his life around their absence, defined himself by their loss. Who would he be if they returned? And what of Savannah? In the short time she'd been at the ranch, she had somehow worked her way past his defenses, becoming not just a guest, but something closer to a friend. There was a connection between them forged in shared pain and mutual respect. If Rebecca were alive, Ezra pushed the thought away, one step at a time. First, they had to reach Eagle Rock. Then they would face whatever truths awaited them there. The night passed without incident, and they broke camp at first light. The day dawned clear and warm, promising heat, as the sun climbed higher. They rode in silence, each wrapped in private thoughts, the horses picking their way carefully through increasingly rocky terrain. By mid-morning, the distinctive shape of Eagle Rock came into view, a massive formation that indeed resembled a great bird of prey perched on the horizon. Ezra felt a tightening in his chest at the sight. So close now to answers, yet still far enough that those answers remained unclear. There! Savannah pointed to a cluster of juniper trees on the eastern face, exactly where the map had indicated. That must be the place. They approached cautiously, Ezra scanning the surroundings for any sign of ambush or surveillance. Eagle Rock was isolated, but McCready knew its significance. He might have sent men ahead, immediately anticipating their destination. The junipers formed a natural screen behind which a narrow opening led into the rock face. Ezra tied the horses securely, then checked his weapons. "Stay behind me," he instructed Savannah, "and be ready to run if there's trouble." She nodded her hand, going to the knife at her belt, a practical gesture that reminded Ezra she was not helpless despite her recent injuries. The cave entrance was nearly invisible, unless you knew exactly where to look. A testament to Running Water's skill in finding secure shelter. Ezra moved forward cautiously, senses alert for any sign of occupation past or present. The interior was cool and dim after the bright desert sun. As their eyes adjusted, the space revealed itself a natural chamber perhaps 20 feet across, with a smaller alcove off to one side. Ancient petroglyphs adorned the walls, evidence that this place had been known to the Apache for generations. "Someone's been here," Savannah observed, pointing to the remains of a fire pit in the center of the chamber. "Recently," Ezra knelt to examine it, running his fingers through the ash. "Within the last week," he confirmed. "One person, maybe two." They searched the cave methodically, looking for any sign of Rebecca and Sarah's presence, past or present. In the smaller alcove, Ezra found what he was seeking, initials scratched into the rock wall, RM and SM. "Rebecca and Sarah Morgan," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "They were here." Savannah joined him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "This proves your wife at least survived the raid," she said softly. "But where are they now?" Ezra's voice held equal parts hope and frustration. "There's nothing here to indicate where they went." As they continued searching, Savannah called out from deeper in the alcove. "Ezra, look at this." She had found a small niche in the wall, covered by a flat stone. Behind it was a space that contained a folded piece of paper yellowed with age, but preserved in the dry cave air. With trembling hands, Ezra unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably Rebecca's flowing script that had once penned love letters and shopping lists with equal care. "My dearest Ezra," he read aloud, his voice catching. "If you are reading this, then you have found our sanctuary. Running water saved us from the raid and brought us here. But we cannot stay. The army is hunting him as a traitor, and we will travel with him to the Valley of Souls, where he says we will be safe among his people. I pray daily that you survived and will find this message. Know that Sarah and I think of you constantly. Follow the rising sun from Eagle Rock for 2 days, and you will find the entrance to the valley. Look for the 3 standing stones. We will wait for you there as long as we can. All my love, Rebecca." The letter was dated 3 days after the raid, 8 years ago. Ezra stared at the paper, emotions warring on his face. Joy that they had survived, anguish at the years lost, hope that they might still be waiting, fear that they had long ago given up and moved on. "They went to the Valley of Souls," Savannah said, taking the map from her pouch. "It's here." She pointed to a location marked with a distinctive symbol. "East of Eagle Rock, just as the letter says." Ezra carefully refolded the letter and tucked it inside his shirt close to his heart. "Then that's where we're going." As they emerged from the cave, the sun was high overhead, casting harsh shadows across the rocky landscape. They were about to mount up when Savannah suddenly grabbed Ezra's arm, pointing to a dust cloud in the distance. "Riders," she said urgently. "At least 6 of them." Ezra quickly assessed their options. There was no time to flee. The riders would easily spot them on the open terrain. Returning to the cave would trap them with only one exit. "Up there," he decided, indicating a rocky outcropping above the cave entrance. "We'll have the high ground and cover." They scrambled up the steep path, leading the horses as far as they could before tying them in a sheltered spot. Then they continued on foot to the outcropping, which provided both concealment and a clear view of the approaching riders. Through his field glass, Ezra confirmed his fears. "McCready," he reported grimly, "and his deputies, plus 2 others I don't recognize. How did they find us so quickly? They must have been watching the ranch, followed our trail." Ezra's mind raced through options. Or they already had men near Eagle Rock waiting. The riders approached steadily, clearly tracking their path from the canyon. There would be no avoiding confrontation now. "What's the plan?" Savannah asked, her voice remarkably steady, given the circumstances. Ezra checked his ammunition. "We hold position. Use the terrain to our advantage. Try to negotiate if possible. And if it's not possible, He met her gaze directly. Then we fight. But Savannah, his voice softened. If things go badly, you need to run. Head for the valley. Find Rebecca and Sarah if they're there. She started to protest, but he cut her off. Promise me. The map and the truth about your father need to survive even if we don't. After a moment, she nodded reluctantly. I promise. The riders halted 100 yards from the cave entrance, spreading out in a practiced formation. McCready moved slightly ahead of the others, scanning the rocks above. Morgan? He called out, his voice carrying in the still desert air. I know you're up there. You're trespassing on private property. Ezra exchanged a glance with Savannah. Private property? This was unclaimed territory as far as he knew, traditional Apache land that had never been formally deeded. Show yourself, and we can discuss this civilly, McCready continued. No need for things to get messy, like they got messy for Thomas Sullivan. Ezra called back, his position partially concealed behind a boulder. McCready's expression hardened. Sullivan was a thief. He stole more than gold. What's that supposed to mean? It means he took something that didn't belong to him. McCready gestured to the two unfamiliar men. These gentlemen represent the Eagle Rock Mining Company. This entire area is their legal claim, including any caves and their contents. Ezra's suspicions crystallized. There is no Eagle Rock Mining Company, McCready. Just you and whatever scheme you've been running. The sheriff's false, congenial manner dropped away. Always were too smart for your own good, Morgan. Fine, we'll do this the hard way. He turned to his men. Flush them out, alive if possible, but I want that map. The deputies spread out, seeking cover as they prepared to advance up the slope. Ezra signaled to Savannah to move further back among the rocks, establishing a crossfire position. The first shots came from below, bullets ricocheting off stone near Ezra's position. He returned fire, deliberately aiming not to kill, but to force the deputies to keep their heads down. We're outnumbered, Savannah observed, firing a careful shot that sent one deputy scrambling for better cover. But we have the high ground, Ezra replied, and they don't know exactly where we are. The exchange of gunfire continued sporadically, neither side willing to expose themselves unnecessarily. But Ezra knew it was only a matter of time before McCready's men worked their way up the slope. They needed a diversion. As if reading his thoughts, Savannah pointed to a cluster of boulders perched precariously on the slope. If we could dislodge those, Ezra saw the potential immediately. A rock slide would force the deputies to retreat, possibly creating enough confusion for an escape. Cover me, he said, moving into position behind the largest boulder. Savannah laid down, suppressing fire, keeping the deputies pinned, while Ezra worked to dislodge the rocks with a long branch as a lever. The first boulder shifted, then tumbled down the slope, gathering momentum and triggering a cascade of smaller rocks. The deputies scattered, shouting warnings to each other. In the confusion, Ezra spotted an opening. Now, and he called to Savannah, head for the horses. They ran in a crouch, using the continuing rock slide as cover. They had nearly reached the sheltered spot where they'd left the horses when a shot rang out, different from the deputies' weapons, a rifle high-powered and precise. Ezra felt the impact before he heard the sound, a searing pain tearing through his left shoulder. He stumbled, but kept moving, Savannah supporting him as they reached the horses. "You're hit," she said urgently, examining the wound. "Through and through," Ezra gritted out. "I can ride." They mounted quickly, Ezra fighting through waves of pain as he pulled himself into the saddle. Below, the deputies were regrouping, McCready shouting orders as they prepared to pursue. "This way," Savannah urged, guiding her horse toward a narrow trail that climbed higher up the rocky slope not the direction McCready would expect them to take. The trail was treacherous, barely wide enough for the horses, but it offered concealment as they climbed. Behind them, sounds of pursuit faded temporarily as the deputies searched the more obvious escape routes. "Where are we going?" Ezra asked, fighting to stay conscious as blood seeped through his hastily bandaged shoulder. "There's another way to the valley," Savannah replied. "My father marked it on the map, a high pass that few know about." They rode through the afternoon, climbing steadily into more rugged terrain. Ezra's wound throbbed with each hoofbeat, but he refused to stop until they were well clear of Eagle Rock. Finally, as the sun began to set, they found a sheltered hollow between towering rock formations. "We'll rest here," Savannah decided, helping Ezra dismount. "I need to tend that wound properly." He didn't argue, which spoke volumes about his condition. The bleeding had slowed, but the pain was intense, and he knew the risk of infection was high in these conditions. Savannah worked efficiently, cleaning the wound with water and whiskey from their supplies, then applying a poultice of herbs she had gathered along the way. Her hands were gentle but sure, reminding Ezra that she had likely tended many such injuries in her life among the Apache. "You'll live," she pronounced, finally securing the bandage with a strip of clean cloth. "But you need rest." "We need to keep moving," Ezra protested weakly. "McCready won't give up." "You'll be no good to anyone if that wound festers," she countered firmly. "Rest. I'll keep watch." Too exhausted to argue further, Ezra leaned back against his saddle, the events of the day catching up to him. As darkness fell, Savannah built a small, nearly smokeless fire, its warmth a comfort against the desert night's chill. "Why is McCready so determined to get the map?" Ezra asked after a while, his voice low in the gathering darkness. Savannah added a small branch to the fire, considering the question. "I think it's about more than just gold," she said finally. "The Valley of Souls is sacred to my people. There are stories, legends." "What kind of legends?" "They say the valley holds power-healing springs plants that can cure any disease." She looked at him across the fire. "Most outsiders dismiss such tales as superstition, but my father believed. And perhaps McCready does too." Ezra thought of McCready's determined pursuit, his years of searching. A man doesn't go to such lengths for something he doesn't believe exists. "No," Savannah agreed. "He doesn't." The fire crackled softly between them, casting flickering shadows across the rock walls surrounding them. Above, stars emerged in a sky untouched by human lights, a vast celestial canvas stretching to infinity. "Will you tell me about them?" Savannah asked softly. "Rebecca and Sarah. Not how you lost them, but who they were." The request surprised Ezra, but he found himself willing to answer. Perhaps it was the pain or exhaustion or the simple human connection that had grown between them, but the words came more easily than he would have expected. "Rebecca was a teacher before we married." He began, memories rising like water from a desert spring. She loved books, poetry especially, had a way of seeing beauty in places most folks overlooked. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She used to say that's why she married me, said I had beauty hiding beneath all the rough edges." "She sounds wise," Savannah observed. "Wiser than I deserved." Ezra's gaze drifted to the stars overhead. "And Sarah, she was sunshine in human form. Curious about everything, always asking questions, never still for a moment. Had her mother's eyes and smile, but my stubborn streak." His voice roughened with emotion. "She'd be 14 now, almost a young woman." The realization hit him with unexpected force, all the years missed, the moments lost. If they were alive, he wouldn't even recognize his own daughter. "What will you do if we find them?" Savannah asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between them. Ezra considered for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted finally. 8 years is a lifetime. They've made a life without me, just as I've made one without them. But you never stopped loving them. No, he agreed softly. I never did. The conversation lapsed into silence, each lost in private thoughts. Eventually, Savannah insisted Ezra get some sleep, while she took first watch. Despite the pain in his shoulder and the turmoil in his mind, exhaustion claimed him quickly. He dreamed of Rebecca and Sarah not as he'd last seen them, but as they might be now older, changed by time and circumstance. In the dream, they were waiting for him in a green valley, sunlight streaming around them. He tried to reach them, but the distance between them seemed to stretch endlessly. Ezra woke with a start, momentarily disoriented. The fire had burned down to embers, and Savannah was gently shaking his uninjured shoulder. "Riders," she whispered, moving along the valley floor. "McCrady's men." Fully alert now, Ezra carefully sat up, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. Through the pre-dawn gloom, he could make out torches in the distance, methodically working their way along the base of the cliffs. "They're searching every possible trail," he observed. "McCrady's determined. We should move while it's still dark," Savannah suggested. "The high pass isn't far, and they won't expect us to go higher rather than descending." Ezra nodded agreement, though the prospect of more riding with his injured shoulder was unappealing. They broke camp quickly and silently, erasing all signs of their presence before mounting up. Savannah led the way, following a trail so faint it was barely visible even to Ezra's experienced eyes. They climbed steadily as the eastern sky began to lighten, revealing a landscape of breathtaking beauty, rugged peaks, deep canyons, the desert floor spreading out below them like a vast copper sea. By full daylight, they had reached the pass, a narrow gap between towering rock formations that marked the highest point of their journey. On the other side, according to the map, lay the path to the Valley of Souls. Savannah halted at the summit, gazing eastward with an expression of wonder. Ezra drew alongside her, following her gaze to the vista before them. Below, nestled among the mountains, like a hidden jewel, lay a valley of unexpected green, a stark contrast to the desert that surrounded it. A stream wound through its center, fed by springs that must originate deep within the earth. Trees lined the watercourse, and even from this distance Ezra could make out patches of color that suggested wildflowers. The Valley of Souls. Savannah breathed, her voice filled with reverence. "My father's people have guarded this place for generations." As Ezra stared at the valley, a movement caught his eye, a thin spiral of smoke rising from a cluster of structures near the far end. People. Someone was living in the valley. "We're not alone," he observed, pointing to the smoke. Savannah nodded. "The letter said Rebecca and Sarah went with my father to his people. This must be where they came." Hope and apprehension warred in Ezra's chest. After 8 years of believing his family dead after the long journey and the confrontation at Eagle Rock, they might be just hours away from reunion, or from final confirmation that they were truly gone. "There's only one way to find out," he said, gathering his resolve. As they prepared to descend into the valley, a glint of metal on the trail behind them caught Ezra's attention. He turned, scanning the path they had traveled, and spotted movement among the rocks, sunlight reflecting off a rifle barrel. "We've got company," he warned Savannah. "McCrady must have guessed our route." Sure enough, several riders were visible now, making their way carefully up the trail toward the pass. They were still a good distance away, but gaining steadily. "We need to move," Savannah urged. "Once we're in the valley, we'll have the advantage. My father's people will help us." Ezra wasn't so sure Running Water's people might welcome Savannah, but an ex-Army scout who had once hunted Apache. That was another matter. Still, they had little choice. Macready and his men were behind them, and the valley offered their only hope of sanctuary. They urged their horses forward, beginning the descent along a trail that wound down the eastern face of the mountain. The path was steep but passable, and they made good progress despite Ezra's injury, which throbbed with renewed intensity after the night's rest. As they neared the valley floor, the vegetation grew increasingly lush, juniper giving way to cottonwood and willow along the stream banks. The air changed too, carrying scents of water and growing things instead of desert dust. Ezra kept a wary eye on the trail behind them, but the rocky terrain made it difficult to track their pursuers' progress. They might have hours of lead time or minutes. There was no way to be sure. "Look," Savannah pointed ahead, where the trail widened into a proper path. 3 standing stones, just like in Rebecca's letter. Indeed, 3 tall monoliths stood like sentinels flanking the path, their surfaces carved with ancient Apache symbols. Beyond them, the path continued toward the cluster of structures they had spotted. From above, a small settlement of traditional wickiups mixed with more permanent wooden buildings. As they passed between the standing stones, Ezra felt a strange sensation, a shift in the air, a change in pressure, as if they had crossed some invisible boundary. From Savannah's expression, she felt it too. "The valley is protected," she said simply, as if that explained everything. They rode toward the settlement at a measured pace, not wanting to appear threatening. As they drew closer, figures emerged from the buildings, men and women dressed in a mixture of traditional Apache clothing and adapted settler garments. Savannah called out in Apache, her voice clear and carrying across the intervening space. A murmur ran through the gathered people, and an elderly man stepped forward leaning on a carved staff. His face was deeply lined, his hair white, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "I am Swift Hawk," he announced in heavily accented English. "Who comes to the Valley of Souls?" Savannah dismounted, approaching with proper respect. "I am Savannah Runningwater, daughter of Joseph Runningwater, who once guided for the white soldiers." The old man's eyes widened. "Runningwater's daughter?" He studied her face carefully, then nodded in recognition. "Yes, I see him in you." He spoke often of his daughter. "My father," Savannah's voice caught. "Is he here? Is he alive?" Swift Hawk's expression softened. "He lived among us for many years after bringing the white woman and child to safety. But he left 2 summers ago to find you. We have not seen him since." The news hit Savannah, visibly hope raised and dashed in the space of moments. Her father had been alive all these years, had even set out to find her, but was now lost again. Ezra dismounted carefully, mindful of his injured shoulder, and stepped forward. "The white woman and child," he said, his voice steady, despite the emotions churning within. "Are they still here?" Swift Hawk turned his penetrating gaze on Ezra. "Who asks for them?" "My name is Ezra Morgan. The woman is my wife, Rebecca. The child, my daughter, Sarah." A ripple of reaction passed through the gathered people. Swift Hawk studied Ezra intently, as if measuring his worth, his truth. "The woman called Rebecca lives among us still," he said finally. "The child has grown into a young woman. They believed you dead, as you believed them." The world seemed to tilt beneath Ezra's feet. They were alive. After 8 years, after all the grief and loss and lonely nights, they were alive, and here in this hidden valley. "Where?" he managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Swift Hawk turned and gestured toward a woman who had been standing at the back of the gathered people. She stepped forward hesitantly, her face partly hidden by a shawl. As she drew closer, she lowered the covering, revealing features Ezra had thought he would never see again, except in dreams and faded photographs. Older now lines at the corners of her eyes, her once auburn hair streaked with gray, but unmistakably Rebecca. She stopped a few paces away, staring at him as if he were a ghost. "Ezra," her voice was exactly as he remembered, though rough with emotion. "Rebecca?" He took a step forward, then another, closing the distance between them. "I thought you were dead. I found bodies at the outpost. Your ring. Running Water gave me his ring." She explained, her eyes never leaving his face. "For safe passage, if we encountered Apache. The bodies must have been others," Ezra finished. "I buried strangers thinking they were you and Sarah." Rebecca's hand reached up, tentative, to touch his face. "You're real," she whispered. "All these years I prayed you had survived, that you would find my message. But as time passed—" "I only found it yesterday," Ezra explained, "at Eagle Rock. I never knew to look before." A sound behind Rebecca made them both turn. A young woman stood there, tall and slender, her blonde hair braided in Apache style. She wore a mixture of settler and native clothing, and her eyes, Ezra's eyes, were wide with disbelief. "Sarah," Ezra breathed, hardly daring to believe. The girl, no young woman now, took a hesitant step forward. "Father." The word was uncertain testing. Ezra opened his arms, and after a moment's hesitation, Sarah moved into them. He held her gently, aware of how strange he must seem to her, a father returned from the dead, a man she barely remembered. "You've grown so much," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Last time I saw you, you barely reached my waist." "Mother kept your memory alive," Sarah replied, her voice muffled against his chest. "She told me stories every night, so I wouldn't forget." Rebecca joined them, completing the circle. For a long moment, they stood together, a family fractured by tragedy and reunited by something that felt very much like miracle. The sound of hoofbeats shattered the moment. Ezra turned sharply, pain lancing through his injured shoulder at the sudden movement. In the distance, riders were descending the trail from the pass, McCready and his men moving fast, now that they had spotted the settlement. "They followed us," Savannah said urgently. "McCready!" Swift Hawk's expression darkened. "The one who seeks the valley's secrets. He has tried before to find us." "He won't stop," Ezra warned. "He believes there's gold here or something even more valuable." The old man nodded grimly. "There are things in this valley worth more than gold to those who understand their value." He turned to the gathered people, issuing rapid instructions in Apache. The settlement burst into activity, women gathering children, men readying weapons. It was clear they had prepared for this possibility. "You brought this danger to us," Swift Hawk said, not accusingly, but as a statement of fact. "Yes," Ezra acknowledged, "and I'll help you face it." Rebecca gripped his arm. "Ezra, your shoulder, you're injured." "It's nothing," he said, though the pain belied his words. "McCready won't stop until he gets what he wants. And what he wants is this valley." Swift Hawk considered Ezra thoughtfully, then nodded. "We will defend our home together, but first," he gestured to Savannah, "Running Water's daughter should see what her father protected all these years, what these men truly seek." He led them toward the largest structure in the settlement, a building that appeared to serve as some kind of meeting place or council house. Inside, illuminated by shafts of sunlight from above, was a sight that made both Ezra and Savannah catch their breath. Along one wall stood a series of clay pots, each sealed and marked with symbols. Swift Hawk approached these reverently. "These contain seeds," he explained. "Seeds of plants that heal wounds that would otherwise fester, cure diseases that would otherwise kill. Plants that grow nowhere else but here in soil, watered by the springs of the Valley of Souls." He moved to another section of the room where clear vessels held water that seemed to glow with an inner light. And this water from the sacred springs, it carries minerals found nowhere else, minerals that strengthen the body and clear the mind. Savannah stared in wonder. This is what my father protected. Yes, Swift Hawk confirmed, not gold, but life itself, more valuable than any metal. Macready learned of these things from a dying man who had once visited the valley. He has sought them ever since, not to help others, but to sell to the highest bidders. Ezra understood now the depth of Macready's obsession. Such medicines would indeed be worth fortunes, especially if they could be controlled by one man. "How do we stop him?" he asked, Swift Hawk's weathered face set in determined lines. "We protect what is ours, as we always have." Outside, the riders were drawing closer. The time for reunion and revelation was over. Now came the moment for defense, for protecting not just a hidden valley, but a legacy of healing and hope that extended far beyond its boundaries. Ezra turned to Rebecca and Sarah, torn between joy at finding them and fear of losing them again. "Stay inside, away from the fighting." Rebecca's expression was resolute. "We've survived 8 years among the Apache, Ezra. We're not helpless." She held up a rifle, handling it with obvious familiarity. "And we won't be separated again." Sarah stood beside her mother, equally determined. "This is our home too, Father. We'll defend it." Ezra recognized the stubborn set of their jaws. His own determination reflected back at him. Pride mingled with concern, but he nodded acceptance. They were not the same people he had lost 8 years ago. They had grown, adapted, become stronger. Together, the reunited family joined Savannah Swift Hawk and the people of the valley as they prepared to make their stand against Macready and his men to protect not just a place, but a future. The Valley of Souls had brought them back together. Now they would fight to ensure it remained a sanctuary for generations to come. Macready and his men reached the edge of the settlement, reining in their horses at the sight of the Apache defenders arrayed before them. Swift Hawk stood at the center, flanked by Ezra and several tribal warriors. Women and older children formed a second line of defense, including Rebecca and Sarah, who stood ready with rifles. Savannah positioned herself near Swift Hawk, her expression resolute. The sheriff dismounted casually, as if arriving for a social call rather than an armed confrontation. His deputies remained on horseback, hands hovering near their weapons. "Quite the welcoming committee," Macready observed dryly. "I'm touched." Swift Hawk stepped forward. "You are not welcome in this valley, Macready. Turn back." The sheriff ignored him, focusing instead on Ezra. "Morgan, seems you found what you were looking for." His gaze shifted to Rebecca and Sarah. "Mrs. Morgan, I presume, and the daughter touching reunion. Hate to interrupt." "Leave Macready," Ezra said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man with nothing left to lose. "There's nothing for you here." Macready laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the valley's stillness. "Nothing. This valley is worth more than all the gold in California. The water alone could make a man rich beyond dreams." His eyes narrowed. "And we both know there's more than just water here." "The valley's gifts are not for sale," Swift Hawk declared. "They belong to all people, not to one man's greed." "Poetic," Macready sneered, "but outdated. Progress is coming, old man. Mining companies, railroads, the future. Your people can adapt or disappear." He turned to his deputies. "Secure the settlement. Anyone who resists," his hand moved to his gun, "deal with them." The deputies began to spread out, but before they could advance, a high-pitched whistling sound cut through the air. From the surrounding cliffs, dozens of Apache warriors appeared, bows drawn, and rifles aimed. McCready's men froze, suddenly aware of their vulnerability. "You're outnumbered, McCready," Ezra observed calmly, "and outmaneuvered. These people have defended this valley for generations. Did you really think they wouldn't be prepared?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the sheriff's face. He scanned the cliffs, counting the warriors, calculating odds that were rapidly shifting against him. "This doesn't have to end in bloodshed," Ezra continued. "Ride away, forget you found this place." McCready's expression hardened. "You know I can't do that, Morgan. I've spent too many years searching." "Then you've wasted those years." Savannah stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "My father didn't hide this place to protect gold or riches. He protected it because it's sacred, because its gifts are meant for healing, not profit." "Your father," McCready spat the word. "Running Water was a traitor to both sides. He betrayed the army, then his own people." "That's a lie," Savannah countered. "He tried to prevent bloodshed. When he couldn't, he saved those he could, like Rebecca and Sarah." "And what about the others at the outpost?" McCready demanded, turning to Ezra. "Did he save them too, or just your wife and child?" The question hit Ezra like a physical blow. He had never considered the full implications of Running Water's actions, that, in saving Rebecca and Sarah, he had been forced to choose who lived and who died. "He did what he could," Rebecca spoke up, stepping forward. "The raid happened too quickly. He saved us, then returned for others, but by then the buildings were burning." McCready scoffed. "Convenient explanation." "It's the truth," Rebecca insisted. "I was there. You weren't." A tense silence fell over the confrontation. McCready's men remained poised for action, but clearly unnerved by the Apache warriors surrounding them. The outcome balanced on a knife's edge. Then McCready made his choice. His hand moved with surprising speed, drawing his pistol not toward Ezra or Swift Hawk, but toward Savannah. "The map," he demanded. "Hand it over, or Running Water's daughter dies right here." Before anyone could react, a single shot rang out, not from McCready's gun but from somewhere behind the settlement. McCready staggered, his pistol falling unfired, as blood blossomed on his shoulder. The deputies reacted instantly, weapons raised, but uncertain where to aim. "Hold your fire!" a voice called out, deep, authoritative, and hauntingly familiar to Savannah. From between two buildings emerged a man Apache in heritage, but dressed in a mixture of native and settler clothing. His hair was streaked with gray, his face weathered by years and hardship, but his eyes burned with fierce determination. In his hands he held a rifle still smoking from the shot. "Father," Savannah whispered, disbelieving. Joseph Running Water stepped into the clearing, his rifle trained steadily on the wounded McCready. "8 years I've been hunting you, McCready," he said, his English perfect, despite a slight accent. 8 years since I learned it was you who ordered the attack on my people, using the outpost as an excuse. McCready clutched his wounded shoulder, face twisted with pain and rage. "You have no proof." "I have this." Running Water pulled a folded paper from his shirt. "Your orders to Captain Blackwood. The ones that never made it into official records. The ones that specifically called for elimination of all Apache in the region, regardless of peace treaties." Ezra stared at Running Water pieces falling into place. "You've been tracking McCready all this time." Running Water nodded. "After bringing Rebecca and Sarah to the valley, I returned to find evidence of what really happened. The trail led to McCready and his secret mining interests in Apache territory. He wanted the land cleared," Ezra realized. "The raids gave him the excuse he needed to push for removal of all Apache." "The oldest story in the West," Running Water agreed grimly. "But I found proof, enough to hang him." McCready laughed a harsh sound despite his injury. You think anyone will take the word of an Apache over a decorated officer, over a sheriff? They'll listen to me. A new voice joined the confrontation. One of McCready's deputies stepped forward, removing his hat. Marshal James Cooper, Territorial Authority. I've been investigating Sheriff McCready for 6 months on suspicion of corruption and multiple murders. McCready's face drained of color. Williams, you're a federal marshal. The man nodded. Your reputation reached all the way to Washington, McCready. Too many dead homesteaders, too many coincidental Apache raids on land you later claimed for mining rights. He turned to the other deputies. Lower your weapons, men. This is over. For a moment, it seemed McCready might order his men to fight anyway. But the odds were overwhelming. Apache warriors on the cliffs, the settlement defenders, and now betrayal from within his own ranks. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Secure him, Cooper ordered the remaining deputies, who moved to disarm their former boss. Running Water lowered his rifle, finally turning his full attention to Savannah. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other across the distance of years. My daughter, he said, his voice breaking. My Savannah. She ran to him then, crossing the space between them in seconds, throwing herself into his arms. He embraced her tightly, tears streaming down his weathered face. I thought you were dead, she sobbed against his chest. All these years. I never stopped looking for you, he assured her. When I heard about your marriage to Thomas Sullivan, I was trying to reach you. But by then, McCready had recognized my name on the registry inquiries. He sent men after me. Thomas is dead, Savannah said, her voice catching. They killed him looking for the map. Running Water closed his eyes briefly in pain. I am sorry, daughter. So much loss because of one man's greed. As the deputies secured McCready and the immediate threat subsided, the defenders began to relax. Swift Hawk approached Running Water, the two men clasping forearms in greeting. You return to us at last, brother, the elder said, and you bring your daughter as you promised. And justice, Running Water added, glancing toward the captured McCready. Marshal Cooper approached Ezra, who still stood protectively near Rebecca and Sarah. Mr. Morgan, he said, extending his hand. Your reputation preceded you as well, though in a different way. Your service record is exemplary. That was a long time ago, Ezra replied, shaking the offered hand nonetheless. Perhaps, Cooper acknowledged, but we could use men like you in the Territorial Authority, men who understand both worlds. He glanced meaningfully at Rebecca and Sarah, who had adapted to life among the Apache, and at Running Water, who moved comfortably between cultures. I'm not looking for a badge, Ezra said firmly. Think about it, Cooper suggested. The territory is changing. We need peacemakers more than gunfighters now. As the marshal moved away to organize the departure of McCready and his men, Rebecca slipped her hand into Ezra's. He's right, you know, she said softly. You always were more peacemaker than fighter, even if you didn't see it yourself. Ezra looked down at her, still marveling at her presence. All I want now is time with you and Sarah. 8 years to catch up on. Sarah joined them, no longer the small child of his memories, but a young woman with his determination and her mother's grace. We have time now, Father, she said. All the time in the world. The settlement gradually returned to normal as the threat receded. The warriors came down from the cliffs, families reunited, and the atmosphere shifted from tension to cautious celebration. Marshal Cooper and the deputies prepared to depart with their prisoner, promising to return with official papers protecting the valley under new territorial agreements. That evening, a council fire was lit in the center of the settlement. the entire community gathered along with their guests. Ezra sat with Rebecca and Sarah, still adjusting to the miracle of their reunion. Across the fire, Savannah sat beside her father, their heads bent close in conversation, making up for years of separation. Swift Hawk rose to address the gathering, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "Today we have witnessed the closing of a circle," he declared. "Running water returns to us, bringing justice. The Morgan family is reunited. The valley remains protected." He looked around the circle, meeting each gaze in turn. But circles do not truly close. They continue like the seasons, like life itself. He gestured to Ezra and running water. These men once stood on opposite sides of conflict. Now they stand together as protectors of the same people, the same place. His gaze moved to Rebecca and Sarah, then to Savannah. These women have bridged worlds, carrying the best of each forward. The elder raised his hands toward the star-filled sky. This is the way forward, not separation, not conflict, but understanding. The joining of strengths, the healing of old wounds. As Swift Hawk spoke, Ezra felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, a burden he had carried for 8 long years. The grief, the hatred, the bitter loneliness, all transformed by the unexpected gift of reunion, of second chances. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Ezra and Rebecca walked to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. The moon cast silver light across the landscape, turning the stream into a ribbon of quicksilver winding through the heart of their sanctuary. "Do you remember," Rebecca asked softly, "what you said to me when you left for that last scouting mission?" Ezra shook his head. "I've replayed that day in my mind 1,000 times. But the words, you said, 'Wait for me. No matter what happens, wait for me.'" She turned to face him, moonlight illuminating the tears in her eyes. "So I did. Even when everyone said you must be dead, I waited." Ezra cupped her face gently, marveling at the strength that had sustained her through years of uncertainty. "I'm sorry it took so long to find you," he whispered. "You're here now," she replied simply. "That's what matters." They held each other under the vast desert sky, surrounded by the valley that had sheltered Rebecca and Sarah during their years apart, that now offered them all a chance at a new beginning. The following days brought significant changes to the Valley of Souls. Marshal Cooper returned with official documents recognizing the area as protected territory under joint Apache and federal oversight. Running Water was named official liaison, his years of service to both worlds finally acknowledged. McCready faced trial in the territorial capital, his crimes laid bare before judges who could not ignore the substantial evidence Running Water had gathered. The corrupt sheriff's network of associates was exposed, bringing justice to many who had suffered under his machinations. For the Morgan family, the days were filled with reunion and rediscovery. Ezra learned of Rebecca and Sarah's years in the valley, how they had adapted to Apache ways while maintaining their own traditions, how Sarah had grown from a frightened child into a confident young woman fluent in 2 languages and cultures. "Will you stay?" Sarah asked her father one afternoon as they walked along the stream bank. Here, in the valley, Ezra considered the question carefully. "What would you want, Sarah?" She looked surprised at having her opinion sought so directly. I love it here," she admitted. "But I've also wondered about the world beyond. Mother has taught me from books, but there's so much I haven't seen." "Perhaps we don't have to choose," Ezra suggested. "The ranch is still ours if we want it. But this place is part of your life now, part of who you've become. Maybe we can have both." Sarah smiled, reminding Ezra so powerfully of the little girl he had lost that his breath caught. "I'd like that," she said. Running Water and Savannah faced their own decisions. With Thomas gone and her home destroyed, Savannah had no reason to return to her previous life. Yet she carried skills and knowledge that could benefit others beyond the valley. "I could teach," she told her father as they sorted healing herbs in the council house. "The techniques you showed me, the plants that heal these, shouldn't be kept secret if they can help people." Running Water nodded thoughtfully. The valley's gifts were never meant to be hoarded, only protected from those who would misuse them. He sorted through a collection of seeds. These could grow in other places with proper care. "Perhaps that is your path to be a bridge," as Swift Hawk said. The idea took root, not just for Savannah, but for all of them. The valley need not be isolated to remain safe. Its wisdom, its healing properties could extend outward through those who understood and respected its nature. One evening, a week after the confrontation with McCready, Ezra found Savannah sitting alone by the council fire, staring into the flames with a contemplative expression. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. She looked up, smiling in welcome. "Please do." Ezra settled beside her, his wounded shoulder healing well under the care of the valley's medicine. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, watching the fire dance. "I've been thinking about what happens next," Ezra said finally. "For you and your family," Savannah asked. "For all of us." He turned to face her. "You saved my life, Savannah. Not just at Eagle Rock, but before that when you arrived at my ranch. I was barely living, just existing day to day." She shook her head. "You saved me first." "Maybe we saved each other," Ezra acknowledged. "And now we both have a chance to build something new." He hesitated, then continued. "Rebecca and I have been talking. The ranch is large enough for 2 families. If you and your father wanted a place beyond the valley, sometimes a foothold in the other world, there would be a home for you there." Savannah's eyes widened in surprise. "You would offer that after everything between our people?" "Because of everything between our people," Ezra corrected. "It's time to heal old wounds, not just for us, but for others who will come after." Tears shimmered in Savannah's eyes, reflecting the firelight. "Thank you," she said simply. "I will speak with my father. But yes, I think we would like that very much." The decision wasn't just about a place to live, and they both knew it. It was about forging a new path, about demonstrating that coexistence wasn't just possible, but beneficial. The ranch could become a waypoint between worlds, just as the valley was a sanctuary of healing. "What about Marshall Cooper's offer?" Savannah asked after a moment. "Will you accept a position with the Territorial Authority?" Ezra smiled slightly. "I told him I'd consider it, but only on my terms. No badge, no official title, just a consultant when needed, someone who can speak to both sides when conflicts arise." "A peacemaker," Savannah observed, echoing Rebecca's words. "Something like that," he agreed. "The West is changing. The old ways, solving everything with guns and force those days, are ending. What comes next needs to be better for everyone." Their conversation was interrupted by approaching footsteps. Running Water joined them at the fire, nodding respectfully to Ezra. "I hope I am not intruding," he said. "Not at all," Ezra replied, gesturing to the space beside them. "We were just discussing the future." Running Water sat down, his movements graceful despite the years and hardships he had endured. "A worthy topic. The past has claimed too much of our attention for too long." "I was telling Savannah about our idea for the ranch," Ezra explained. "As a place where your family would always be welcome." The Apache scout studied Ezra thoughtfully. "Once we stood on opposite sides of a conflict neither of us fully understood. Now you offer to share your home." "The world has room enough for all of us," Ezra said simply, "if we're willing to make space." Running Water extended his hand, a gesture he had learned from white men, but imbued with the sincerity of his own people. Ezra clasped it firmly, the handshake sealing more than just an agreement about property. It represented a new beginning, a healing of ancient wounds. "There is something I have carried for many years," Running Water said, reaching into a pouch at his waist. "Something I think should return to you now." He withdrew a small object and held it out to Ezra. In his palm lay a silver locket identical to the one Ezra wore around his neck. "I found this at the outpost," Running Water explained. "After I led Rebecca and Sarah to safety, I returned hoping to save others. The buildings were burning the attack over. This was lying in the dirt, as if lost in struggle or flight." Ezra took the locket with trembling hands. "Rebecca had one just like it," he said, "a matched pair. I gave hers to her on our wedding day." "I did not know whose it was," Running Water continued, "but I felt it was important that one day it might help tell the story of what happened there. I have carried it ever since, waiting for the right moment." Ezra opened the small silver case. Inside, where his own locket held Rebecca's portrait, this one contained a miniature painting of himself, younger and in uniform. It was indeed Rebecca's locket, lost during their desperate flight from the outpost. "A circle completed," Ezra murmured, closing his hand around the precious object. "Thank you for keeping it safe all these years." Running Water nodded. "Some things are meant to return home, no matter how long the journey." Later that night, Ezra gave the locket back to Rebecca, watching as tears filled her eyes at the sight of the treasure she had thought lost forever. She immediately placed it around her neck where it belonged. "Now we both carry each other close to our hearts again," she said, touching the matching locket that Ezra wore. The simple act of restoration, a small silver locket returned after 8 years, seemed to symbolize everything that had happened. What was lost could sometimes be found. What was broken could sometimes be mended. The journey might be long and difficult, but home remained waiting. 3 weeks after this confrontation with McCready, preparations began for departure. Not a final leaving, but the first of what would become regular journeys between the valley and the outside world. Ezra, Rebecca, and Sarah would return to the ranch to rebuild and expand it. Savannah and Running Water would accompany them to see the place that would become their second home. The morning of departure dawned clear and bright, the desert autumn bringing cooler temperatures and crystalline skies. The travelers gathered at the edge of the settlement, horses loaded with provisions and a few precious possessions. Swift Hawk conducted a blessing ceremony, his weathered hands moving in ancient patterns as he spoke words of protection and guidance. When he finished, he presented each traveler with a small clay vial. "Water from the sacred spring," he explained, "to remind you of the valley when you are away, and to heal any wounds you may encounter." He turned to Sarah, placing a special bundle in her hands. "Seeds," he told her. "The valley's gifts. You will plant these at your new home, creating a bridge between our worlds." Sarah accepted the responsibility, solemnly tucking the seed bundle carefully into her saddlebag. At 14, she stood at the threshold between child and woman, between the protected life of the valley and the wider world beyond. The seeds represented that transition, carrying forward the wisdom of one place into new soil. As final preparations were made, Ezra found himself standing slightly apart, gazing across the valley that had changed everything. The morning light bathed the landscape in gold, highlighting the green ribbon of vegetation along the stream. The weathered stone of ancient cliffs, the simple beauty of the settlement nestled in the heart of the desert. Running Water approached, standing beside him in contemplative silence for a moment. "It is a view that stays with you," he observed finally, "no matter how far you travel." Ezra nodded. I've seen a lot of country, but nothing quite like this place. The valley changed me, Running Water said, as it changed Rebecca and Sarah, as it has changed you, though your time here has been brief. How does one place hold such power? Ezra wondered aloud. Running Water smiled slightly. My people believe that certain places in the world stand at the intersection of realms where the physical and spiritual worlds touch. The Valley of Souls is such a place. He gestured toward the mountains surrounding them. The barrier that protects it is not just stone, but something deeper. Ezra thought of the strange sensation he had felt when passing between the standing stones that shift in the air, that sense of crossing a threshold beyond the physical. Will it remain safe? He asked. Now that more people know of its existence, the valley protects itself, Running Water assured him. Those who come with greed or harmful intent will find it difficult to remain here. You saw how McCrady's men grew uneasy, how their resolve weakened once they entered. And those like Marshal Cooper respects what he does not fully understand, Running Water replied. That is wisdom. He will help ensure the outside world's laws recognize the valley's special nature, even if they cannot comprehend it. Rebecca joined them dressed for travel in a practical combination of settler clothing and Apache adaptations. The others are ready, she informed them. As they turned to join the waiting group, Rebecca slipped her hand into Ezra's. Are you certain about this? She asked quietly. Leaving the valley. It's not leaving, Ezra replied. It's expanding. The valley will always be here, a part of who we are now. But there's work to be done beyond these mountains. Rebecca squeezed his hand in understanding. Building bridges. Exactly. The small caravan set out as the sun climbed higher, following the eastern trail that would lead them back to the world beyond the valley. Swift Hawk and the other elders stood at the 3 standing stones offering final blessings as the travelers passed between the ancient monoliths. As they crested the first rise, Ezra turned in his saddle for a last look at the Valley of Souls. From this vantage point, he could see the entire sanctuary spread out below the settlement, the stream, the sacred springs, all nestled within protective mountains. A place of healing that had mended more than physical wounds. We'll return, Sarah said confidently, noticing her father's backward glance. This isn't goodbye. Ezra smiled at his daughter, seeing in her face the perfect blending of her mother's gentleness and his own determination combined with something uniquely her own, a wisdom beyond her years forged in the crucible of survival and adaptation. No, he agreed. Not goodbye. Just until next time. They rode on, leaving the valley behind, yet carrying its essence with them in water vials and seed bundles, in memories and transformed hearts. The journey ahead would not be without challenges. The world beyond the mountains remained complex and often harsh, but they moved forward together, strengthened by what they had found in each other and in the sacred valley. 6 days later, they crested the final hill overlooking Ezra's ranch. The familiar building stood against the desert backdrop, looking smaller somehow than Ezra remembered. The cabin, the barn, the corral, all were intact, though showing signs of neglect during their absence. Home. Ezra said the word, feeling strange, yet right on his lips. Rebecca studied the ranch thoughtfully. It looks different than I imagined from your descriptions. It's just a starting point, Ezra explained. We'll build it into whatever we need it to be. They rode down the slope toward the ranch, dust rising from beneath their horses' hooves. As they approached, Ezra noticed signs that someone had been there during their absence. The water trough had been filled, a stack of firewood neatly arranged beside the cabin. The mystery was solved when Marshal Cooper emerged from the barn, raising a hand in greeting. Thought you might be arriving soon, he called. Took the liberty of getting things ready. They dismounted in the yard, stretching travel-stiff muscles. Cooper approached, extending his hand first to Ezra, then to Running Water. "Everything in order at the valley?" he asked. Running Water nodded. "Swift Hawk sends his regards and his thanks for the official recognition." "Least I could do," Cooper replied. "The territorial governor was mighty interested in your evidence against McCready. Seems our former sheriff had friends in high places, friends who are now facing uncomfortable questions." "What happens now?" Ezra asked. Cooper smiled slightly. "Justice, if we're lucky. Change, whether we're ready or not." He looked around at the ranch. "I took the liberty of filing amended property records while you were away. The eastern section is now registered under Running Water's name as we discussed." Running Water inclined his head in thanks. "Your assistance honors us. Just doing what should have been done years ago." Cooper demurred. The territorial charter always included provisions for native land rights. They were just conveniently ignored by men like McCready. As they unloaded the horses and settled in, the ranch gradually came alive again. Rebecca and Sarah explored every corner, connecting Ezra's descriptions from their years apart with the reality before them. Savannah and Running Water walked the boundaries of their new section, already discussing where to plant the valley seeds, where to build their own cabin. That evening, they gathered around the hearth in Ezra's cabin, now their shared home. The familiar space felt transformed by their presence, warmed not just by the crackling fire, but by voices and laughter that had been absent for too long. Marshal Cooper joined them for the meal, bringing news from the territory and beyond. The world was indeed changing rapidly, railroads pushing ever westward, new settlements springing up, the relationships between native peoples and settlers evolving through both conflict and cooperation. "We're standing at a crossroads," Cooper observed. "The old frontier is vanishing. What replaces it depends on people like you." He looked around the table, who can see beyond the divisions of the past. After Cooper departed, promising to return with additional documentation and supplies, the two families remained around the fire. The conversation flowed easily, plans taking shape for expanding the ranch, for creating a place that would embody the bridge they sought to build. Later, as Rebecca and Sarah retired to the bedroom Ezra had prepared for them, and Savannah and Running Water settled into the barn until their own cabin could be built, Ezra stepped outside onto the porch. The desert night spread around him, stars blazing in the clear sky. From this vantage point, he could see for miles the rolling landscape, the distant mountains that concealed the Valley of Souls, the vast open spaces that had once represented only emptiness and loss to him. Now he saw possibility in that same landscape room to grow, to build, to heal. The ranch was no longer just a place of exile, but the foundation for something new. Rebecca joined him on the porch, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the night chill. "What are you thinking?" she asked, leaning against him. "That I never expected any of this," he admitted. "When Savannah showed up at the gate that night, bleeding and half-conscious, I had no idea she would lead me back to you and Sarah." "The spirits work in mysterious ways," Rebecca said, a hint of teasing in her voice. She had adopted some Apache beliefs during her years in the valley, blending them with her own faith in a way that felt natural to her now. Ezra smiled, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Indeed, they do." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the heavens. "Make a wish," Rebecca whispered, an old tradition between them. Ezra shook his head slightly. "I already have everything I could wish for," he said simply. Rebecca looked up at him, moonlight silvering her features. "So do I." Inside the cabin, Sarah was already asleep, safe under her father's roof for the first time in 8 years. In the barn, Savannah and Running Water rested, preparing for the work of building their new home alongside the Morgans. And beyond the mountains, the Valley of Souls continued its timeless existence, a sanctuary waiting for their return. The circle hadn't closed, it had expanded, embracing new possibilities while honoring what came before. As Ezra and Rebecca returned inside, closing the door against the desert night, they carried with them the certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Family once lost, now found. Wounds once raw, now healing. Souls once adrift, now anchored in love that had survived against all odds. Spring came to the ranch in a burst of unexpected color. The seeds from the Valley of Souls, planted carefully in prepared soil near the stream that ran along the property's edge, had sprouted into vibrant flowering plants, unlike any native to the region. Their healing properties proved as potent here as in their original home, creating a living link between the two places. The months since their return had brought significant changes. Running Water and Savannah had built their cabin on the eastern section of the ranch, a comfortable dwelling that incorporated elements of both Apache and settler design. Ezra and Rebecca had expanded the main house to better accommodate their family, adding rooms and a larger kitchen, where they often gathered for shared meals. Sarah had flourished in her new environment, dividing her time between traditional education from books Rebecca had ordered from back east and practical knowledge taught by Running Water and Savannah. At 15, she moved confidently between cultures, serving as an informal ambassador when visitors came to the ranch. And visitors did come with increasing frequency. Word had spread about the unusual partnership between the Morgan and Running Water families, about the medicinal plants they cultivated, about the peaceful coexistence they demonstrated. Some came seeking healing for ailments that conventional medicine couldn't address. Others came out of curiosity or skepticism. All were received with the same quiet hospitality. Ezra had reluctantly accepted a more formal role with the territorial authority, serving as an advisor on matters involving relations between settlers and native peoples. His experiences and connections made him uniquely qualified to help resolve disputes that might otherwise have escalated into violence. Running Water traveled regularly between the ranch and the Valley of Souls, maintaining ties with Swift Hawk and the community there. Sometimes Savannah accompanied him. Sometimes Sarah went along, continuing her education in Apache ways under the elders' guidance. Rebecca managed the ranch operations with quiet efficiency, having adapted quickly to the routines and responsibilities. Her years in the valley had taught her resilience and practicality that served her well in this new role. On a warm afternoon in late spring, Ezra sat on the porch mending a saddle while watching Sarah and Savannah work in the medicinal garden. The easy companionship between them brought a smile to his face, the young woman his daughter had become, and the remarkable woman who had led him back to his family. Rebecca emerged from the house carrying a tray with glasses of cool water. She distributed them to the gardeners, then brought the remaining glass to Ezra. "Marshal Cooper is coming up the road," she informed him, sitting beside him on the bench. "Looks like he has news." Indeed, the marshal's distinctive figure could be seen approaching on horseback, riding with the unhurried confidence of a man who knew the desert's rhythms. Cooper dismounted in the yard, removing his hat, as Rebecca came forward to greet him. "Mrs. Morgan," he said respectfully. "Looking lovely as always." She smiled at the gallantry. "Come in out of the sun, Marshal. You're just in time for refreshments." They gathered in the shade of the porch where Cooper accepted water gratefully. Sarah and Savannah joined them, curious about the unexpected visit. "I bring news," Cooper announced after quenching his thirst. "Some good, some complicated." He removed a folded newspaper from his saddlebag. "McCrady's trial concluded yesterday. Guilty on all counts." Ezra took the newspaper, scanning the headlines. 20 years in territorial prison, he read aloud. Justice after so long, Running Water said quietly, having emerged from his cabin at the sight of the marshal's arrival. There's more, Cooper continued. The governor has established a commission to review all land claims in areas traditionally occupied by native peoples, particularly those granted during McCrady's tenure. He nodded to Running Water. Your testimony and evidence were instrumental in making this happen. Will it make a difference? Savannah asked, her voice carrying the skepticism born of long experience with broken promises. It already has, Cooper assured her. 3 fraudulent mining claims have been invalidated, the land returned to Apache stewardship. This was unexpected good news, suggesting that perhaps meaningful change was possible after all. And the complicated news, Ezra prompted. Cooper's expression grew more serious. Word of the Valley of Souls has spread further than we might have wished. The territorial papers have published accounts, some accurate, some wildly exaggerated, about its healing properties. He handed Ezra another newspaper. This ran in Santa Fe last week. The headline read, Miracle Valley Secret Apache Sanctuary Holds Cures for Deadly Diseases. The article beneath contained a mishmash of facts and fantasy, describing the valley in terms that made it sound like a mystical paradise, where any ailment could be instantly cured. This is troubling, Running Water observed, reading over Ezra's shoulder. Such stories will attract those seeking easy miracles and those looking to exploit them. Exactly my concern, Cooper agreed. We've already intercepted 2 expeditions attempting to find the valley without authorization. One was a group of desperately ill people led by a self-proclaimed healer. The other was more concerning representatives of a pharmaceutical company from back east, well-armed and determined. Savannah shook her head in dismay. The valley's gifts aren't meant to be exploited or commercialized. They require knowledge, respect, proper preparation. We need to control the narrative, Ezra said thoughtfully. Provide accurate information about what the valley's plants can and cannot do, establish proper protocols for those seeking healing. That was my thought as well, Cooper nodded. Which is why I've brought this. He produced an official-looking document from his coat. The governor has authorized the establishment of a joint commission on traditional medicine with members from both the territorial authority and tribal leadership. He's requested that Running Water serve as co-chair. Running Water looked surprised. This is unexpected. It's an opportunity, Cooper said, to ensure that knowledge is shared respectfully, that ancient wisdom is preserved while being made available to those in need. The proposal sparked an animated discussion among them. The idea of formally recognizing and incorporating Apache healing practices into territorial medical systems was revolutionary, fraught with challenges, but also rich with potential. It would mean more travel, Running Water observed, more time away from the ranch. We would manage, Savannah assured him. This is important work, perhaps the most important you could do. By the time Cooper departed, Running Water had tentatively agreed to accept the position pending consultation with Swift Hawk and the Valley elders. The day's news had opened new possibilities, new pathways forward that none of them had anticipated. That evening, as they shared a meal around the outdoor fire pit, a custom borrowed from the Valley that had become their own tradition, the conversation continued to explore the implications of Cooper's visit. Change comes whether we invite it or not, Running Water observed, gazing into the flames. The question is whether we shape it or are shaped by it. The valley has remained hidden for generations, Sarah pointed out. Why is it becoming known now? Swifthawk would say it is because the time is right, Savannah replied, that the world has need of its wisdom now. Or that we need the world, Ezra suggested. Isolation preserved the valley during times of conflict, but perhaps Connection is what's needed now. Rebecca, who had been listening thoughtfully, spoke up. When I first came to the valley, I saw it only as a refuge, a place to hide from danger. But over time, I understood it was more. It was a place of healing, yes, but also of learning, of growth. She looked around at their gathered faces, illuminated by firelight. Perhaps that's what we're building here in our own way. Not just a ranch, but another kind of healing place. Her words resonated with all of them. In the months since their return, the ranch had indeed become more than just a dwelling place. It had become a crossroads where different worlds met, where old wounds were healed and new connections forged. As the fire burned down to embers and stars filled the desert sky, Ezra found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the night Savannah had collapsed at his gate, bleeding and desperate to the discovery of Rebecca and Sarah in the Valley of Souls. To this new chapter unfolding before them, each step had seemed random, even cruel at times. Yet looking back, he could see a pattern emerging, a purpose he couldn't have imagined. Later, as he and Rebecca prepared for sleep in the quiet house, she voiced the question that had been forming in his mind. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "if all of this was meant to happen, if we were always supposed to find our way back to each other, to build this life?" Ezra considered the question seriously. "I don't know about meant to or supposed to," he replied. "But I do believe that even in our darkest moments, possibilities for healing exist, waiting to be discovered." Rebecca smiled in the darkness, finding his hand with hers. "Like seeds," she murmured sleepily, "waiting for the right conditions to grow." "Like seeds," Ezra agreed, thinking of the garden behind the house where plants from the Valley of Souls now flourished in new soil. Outside, the desert night enfolded the ranch in stillness. In her room, Sarah slept peacefully, no longer haunted by memories of the raid that had once torn their family apart. In their cabin, Savannah and Running Water rested father and daughter, reunited against all odds. And somewhere beyond the mountains, the Valley of Souls continued its timeless existence, a sanctuary of healing that had extended its influence far beyond its boundaries through the lives it had touched. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new paths to explore. But tonight, in the quiet darkness, Ezra Morgan felt a peace he had never expected to find again. A sense of completeness, of coming home not just to a place, but to himself. The journey had been long and painful, marked by loss and separation. But it had led here to this moment, to this life rebuilt from the ashes of what had been lost. As Ezra drifted toward sleep, his wife's hand warm in his, he carried that awareness like a light against the darkness, the knowledge that even on the most barren land, new souls could take root and flourish if given the chance to grow.